And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is June 23rd, Wednesday, June 23rd, 2021. We'll be following along in the agenda with the agenda that was posted in the NPM RFC's repo, issue 401. For folks who are on the call, feel free to add yourselves as attendees to the HackMD doc I've shared and spammed there in chat. Apologize for the spam. Just quickly, I want to remind folks that these calls and all communications on the NPM RFC's repo are covered under a code of conduct that's linked there. We just ask that people be kind. As others are talking, please raise your hand and we'll call on you if someone else is talking. Just in general, please be mindful of others. I want to give some time for folks if they had any announcements or any news that they want to share. If not, I just want to be mindful or remind everybody that we are constantly cutting new releases of the CLI. So if you haven't got the latest version, we got a release 7.18 and then 18.1 went out on Thursday of last week. So feel free to get it. We are now, I think, fully workspace aware. That was the biggest thing that's launched recently for our team, and are continuing to make improvements there on the CLI. So if you want to get it, you can get in the usual ways. But yeah, other than that, let's dive in. The first item we had here were actually a couple PRs that I know Gar had identified that we wanted to speak to a little bit. So the first is PR 3456. It's a feature to add the prefix for version output. Gar, did you want to speak to this bit?
No, this is on the agenda just because of my newness. I haven't had this discussion. I'm making assumptions and I wanted to talk them out here. Because we don't have a JSON output of this command, I assumed the regular output was our machine contract and that we can't change it. And that's what I wanted to confirm here. And I assume the answer is correct, but I have to hear that conversation before I can close things like this in the future. So that's it. This should be quick.
Cool. So basically you're bringing this up because we want to ensure that this is what today after installing Brew, saw that V displays the version and NPM is active. Yeah. So do we want to standardize this?
If we can't accept this because it would be a breaking change, because the output of that command is the thing people are consuming machine-wise. Like for things, obviously things that have .json, -JSON or parsable, I think we have a lot more leeway in changing the output because people aren't machine parsing it while Wes is handling.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, even with the -JSON, I'm sure that there's a fair amount of the ecosystem relying on the non-JSON. Not that that is desirable, but unfortunately, it's the way it is. And I think that's what Jordan's comment was pointing at. I'm pretty confident that this would break NVM. And I am not entirely sure how NVM would resolve this, because it would have to know, well, I guess it wouldn't have to know, it would just have to handle both. But either way, it would, add a bit of complexity there. And that one thing alone is pretty breaking, I would say, because nobody updates their NVM. So we would have to roll it out in such a way that it didn't break everybody's NVM, or only, anyway, I don't know how to make that even work with a major breaking change without going out and getting NVM and N probably, and a bunch of the other version managers updated.
Thanks. Yeah, it didn't sound like anyone was going to say that this needed to land. So that's good enough for me. I can close this PR. I just wanted to make sure it happened here because this was the appropriate place to have the conversation. Thank you. That's all the time we really need to spend on this, in my opinion.
Cool. I'll remove the label from the PR if you're going to close. So following up with that, there was the PR 3437. and this is to fix the error, or essentially, I say fix. This is to essentially add dash dash JSON to ls and search when they error out. Is that correct? Is that a correct synopsis of this, Gar?
Yeah.
And again, in this case, what's the recommendation? I see Nilf, you were the last one to comment.
Well, this is a little more than just a recommendation. On its face, we can't accept this PR, simply because this would require an architecture decision in NPM to say, when I have dash dash JSON, errors now are also going to show up on standard out, and they'll be formatted in JSON, which is not a thing we currently do. People aren't expecting it. Nelf has his hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that was the behavior in NPM 6. And I would certainly contend that if I ask for JSON output and anything that's not JSON ends up being output, that's a bug. It could be that rather than merging the objects together, they go to different streams but are both JSON. But we definitely should not be outputting anything that's not JSON when the user asks for JSON.
Okay, and that goes to kind of my gut feeling of like, we need to have a discussion about this, maybe not at this RFC meeting because it's too fresh, but maybe this is something we need to start an RRFC about. What do we do about dash dash JSON errors? Wes?
So this one's interesting to me because, obviously errors that you're handling are great and well, but if you're a consumer and you were trying to rely on those, always being handled, I think you're not really doing, you can't, right? Like sometime NPM is going to have a non-handled error and it's going to fall back and print a stack trace. And that's sort of like, I don't know, I don't want to say expected, but at least just the reality of it. Maybe it is expected. Like at some point you need that, and it's not going to be in JSON, and that's just part of the, what you're going to get on standard error.
Well, that's an assumption we don't have to make though, because we have a unified exit handler, right? That even on unhandled exceptions, we could just look at that flag and say, oh, they want a JSON. Now when we dump to the output, we somehow convert to JSON. So it's not an unsolvable problem, I would say.
Well, it's a smaller problem than what Wes is suggesting, but there is an unsolvable problem there. There are classes of errors that are going to cause a like C++ stack trace in Node. If you segfault or something like, or there's an out of memory error, like that's going to dump a bunch of garbage to standard error, and there's nothing we can do about that because at that point our exit handler has been thrown out the window as well. But we can definitely catch any just like thrown errors from JavaScript and ensure that those are always JSON. And I think if you do dash dash JSON, then we should do everything we can to make sure that standard error and standard out are outputting a conformant JSON object.
What about things like warnings and stuff from the runtime? And like, there's a bunch of other stuff that can come out on standard error that if that is the contract, it's not always going to be keepable.
That's a good point. We don't trap like deprecation warnings or anything. Say again?
Go ahead. Sure.
You're super buggy, Jordan.
Yeah, I think your connection might be a little
crunchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other way we go is standard error is just not JSON. Like if you do dash dash JSON, we ensure that standard out will be JSON because that's our output.
I think you're breaking up, Jordan. So you can jump to a different Wi-Fi or a different connection.
Yeah, this does seem a little half-baked. Like, what's the problem we're trying to solve here?
Sorry about that. Is this any better?
Yes. That's much better.
Okay. Yes. So no one has ever been able to rely on standard error being JSON. Like that's just not a contract anyone can expect for many reasons. One of which change is what Wes mentioned, which is that Node puts all its deprecation errors there. The only thing I would ever expect with --JSON is that standard out is always JSON. In the same way as if I make a web request to a web server and tell it that I'm accepting application/JSON, I would only expect a successful request to give me JSON. All bets are.
Yes, I think we're talking about an error that would have normally gone to standard error. If you ask for JSON and we know about it, we output it to standard out as JSON. I think that's.
Yeah.
I don't think standard error should be JSON. I would agree with you. No.
Okay, good. Yeah, it definitely seems useful whenever possible to make errors be JSON, but I also like, as long as the only content on standard out is always JSON, I will defer to everybody else completely as to what they think is best.
If people really want JSON errors, would having some kind of global config for that be a thing?
What do you mean by global config, like log level or something, or log type?
Yeah, something like that. Just something that I can set in my npm RC or as a config, like npm config, whatever. That I guess that sits in the RC, but that sets JSON output as, or standard error as JSON output.
Yeah, I guess you could set JSON true, and then the expectation would be that all output would be that. But if you want to separate output from errors, then that would be a net new config, right?
So there are some cases where we print something that could conceivably be considered an error, right? Like if we do ls and there's ls errors, we kind of embed the those aren't errors with the operation. Those are, hey, there's a problem with your package tree, and the output of this ls command is to tell you what those problems are. Similarly, well, warnings for engines actually print a standard error, right? There's a bunch of things that we print to standard error, and we should just keep printing to standard error as just regular old strings. And the standard out, if you do --JSON, standard out is a single JSON object. That's our contract. I mean, really, cool. If that's the contract though, why are we JSON stringifying anything going to standard error? We should just never do that.
Right. So looking at this, then we don't want to this PR specifically, if we're talking about introducing some net new functionality across the CLI, I think that's RFC worthy. If for this specific PR, which is introducing it to LS and search, how do we want to move forward here?
I would not want to merge it until we know what it wants to look like the rest of because this is putting the cart before the horse here. Whatever happens here ends up being what we have to support everywhere else, versus we decide what it looks like and then make this conform to it.
So what we can ask is, can you please go make an RFC for this?
Yeah. How would you want for all of NPM --JSON to affect errors, right? Both, maybe there's different classes of errors, or I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Gar, would you be okay with giving that feedback to Ramas?
I will.
Or we can also own, if we think this is something we actually want to do, then we can own that action. But I don't think anybody here, nobody
really
wants
excited about this.
Yep. So cool. Unless folks have any other comments, feel free to pile on in the PR if you want. And hopefully if this person is interested in this, then we'll see an RFC come along. Moving on then to our RFC. Roy, this is the top level command to manage package JSON. I'm not sure if you got a chance to actually action creating an actual RFC.
Yeah. I opened an actual RFC PR that we can continue the conversation on. It's an early draft still, kind of, but can continue the conversation there, and I'll keep updating it. So yeah, I think important update is that we landed part of the refactor that was needed to kind of enable working on this, or at least make it easier to manage. So that part is probably landing tomorrow, in tomorrow's release, which is basically we cut a nice little package JSON module that will basically save things the way the npm Clyde does. So yeah, so there's that in terms of update. And if we can continue the conversation, I think, yeah, we'll probably still want to flesh out the syntax on how to deal with npm PKG. Wes?
Yeah, I was wondering, I didn't see much follow up here, but it looks like Isaac mentioned using like set scripts.lint.eslint. Is that something, is that like, are you all behind that? Or are you still thinking about the version that's proposed in the original post?
I very much do not want to add a new, very sort of ambiguously named config value of key and value. Like that sort of raises some alarms for me. But like they should just be positional args. I think same with config get and config set.
Yeah, by all means, that it was just a quick sketch. Like it was really not meant to be proposed.
Cool. I agree with that because it also opens the door for the deep set there, right? Which is nice for things like I don't know, CLI tools,
or yeah,
you know, like ESLint configs is one, but like also, you know, standard has some of this. A ton of different CLI tools have data structures that need deep nesting and having key. I just think this keeps the door open for that, for their, you know, docs to use this in the future and tell people, oh, just run this one command and it will do the proper thing.
But even like funding and contributors and stuff that NPM recognizes would benefit from that.
Or scripts or yeah, anything else.
Right.
Actually, one other nice addition would be is if the value that you're setting could be just a JSON formatted object as well. So you could set it like scripts dot, well, maybe not scripts. What would be something? Yeah, in the here tap. So you could say like tap equals, you know, JSON with timeout in it.
That is trickier though, in implementation wise. Like, we need to start really merging objects.
I think if you do a set tap equals and then a JSON string, it replaces.
Yeah, I agree.
If you want to set one, it clobbers the object.
So you're saying the syntax would be with the equals it's JSON and without the equals it's not?
No, I'm saying you have to set an equals. For set, you do key equals value.
Okay. So it's just, you're saying it's always, the value is always going to be JSON, no matter what.
Right. But if you set the key as a, let's say an object, right? So npm pkg set tap.timeout equals 60 means take the, Nilf just said it. Nilf just typed exactly what I was about to say.
Okay.
It means take the tap object, and if there's no tap object, create an object, and then set the timeout value on that object to 60. npm pkg set tap equals open curly brace, quote, timeout, colon, 60, close curly brace, means clobber that object with this one. The thing to figure out, I think, and it's not going to be a particularly contentious bike shed, I don't think, but the thing to kind of specify and just be very clear about in the RFC is what do we do about keys that are not valid JSON, like, or keys that include dots, like what's our approach for that? And especially keeping in mind that JSON is not like the best thing to be writing on the command line. Like you got to get the quotes right and everything. It's kind of a pain.
So you're saying like, how do we handle errors or like mistyped?
No,
well, like if a key, you can use a dot with a key that's an identifier, but if the key has a space in it or a quote in it or something, like in JavaScript, you'd use brackets. And is there that equivalent available here?
So we were going to follow suit with whatever npm views implementation was, right? Like for the key.
Yeah, but npm views implementation is bad. It doesn't support any keys that have dots in them at all. It just doesn't work. And you use dots to separate keys that have hyphens or spaces. It's literally just split on the dot and then walk the object with those values. The other thing is, if we
don't have to
want
boil the ocean.
if we want to set it to a string, right? There's another thing that just needs to be in the RFC. If we want to set it to a string, do you have to include quotes? Because now you have to like single quote the whole thing that you're writing. We don't require that for config. And I think config is actually the closer model for this, not view, right? Because config has set, get, delete.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
It doesn't support nested objects because our config is flat, but our config might not always be flat. And so we should kind of establish like, what is the pattern for specifying the keys with dots? How strict are we going to be in specifying the value? And just do that.
Okay.
But it should be in this RFC. And then when we want to make nested configs, we can say it uses the same syntax.
Should define how we.
What happens now if you try to do config with a dotted key? Does it crap out or does it set it as a flat key?
It sets it as a flat key.
So it sounds like whatever we come up with here for package set is going to not be something that we can make config do in a non-breaking way. Is that accurate? Like whether config allows a nested object or not is something that we could add at any future time. But I mean, in order to add that, we would have to first make the flat form of config match what package does so that it was all the same. And if package takes a key of like a.b and assumes that's nested, then that means that config would have to not assume it's flat for them to be compatible.
Yeah, so I mean, there's going to be some work to get to a place where we can have nested configs. We may even only allow certain top level fields to be nested or whatever, or we may want to use dots in a different way just because it's INI format. It's not JSON format. So the another way we could end up going is we don't actually use nested objects as per the kind of INI spec with like a braced section header, but instead, just keep the keys dotted and handle it on the parse.
Yeah, so just
there's a lot of ways that we could cross the bridge when we get to it.
Yeah, so I'm not actually worried about nested config. I'm worried about while the config is flat, if I get used to typing package set foo.bar equals something, and then I type config set foo.bar equals something, currently it will do a same thing.
So currently it'll
So it seems prudent to find a way to make config reject that key.
That's a pretty significant breaking change though. Changes to configs are like,
but without that breaking change or without a different syntax for package,
it won't be
how
consistent.
can we keep them?
Yeah.
They won't be 100% identical. Unless we want to move to using JSON for config, which is not a terrible idea, but is a big move.
Could we deprecate?
Yeah.
Can we warn if we use a dot in config?
That seems nice. Is there a use case for it?
We've already deprecated a few of the dots to dashes, like the INI init stuff, right? We've got a precedent. And if we want to eventually move config to JSON, this would be the first step of saying, hey, we're not going to support this anymore.
Yeah, I've been talking with Nilf a little bit. We were going to use our pairing session this week actually to talk about nested config.
Well, let's write up the JSON RFC with what makes the most sense for setting and conveniently setting and getting package JSON objects, and then and then kind of specify like, or write out or explore a little bit like where we want config to go, and sort of plot a course there. I think you're right. Like deprecating anything with dots in it is probably a good first step, but I just want to like sort of sketch out the plan and sketch out the destination. And then we can see, okay, does that actually get us closer or not? And what are the subsequent steps after that?
Apologies, I'm just taking notes here. These are all good notes though, for Roy, in terms of updating the RFC to include some of this. Retard.
Oh, you know what? I think specifying a JSON string as the value is not a great idea, actually, on further kind of thinking about this, because what that means is you can't set it to a string of JSON, or we have to be detecting it, or we have to require that the right-hand side of that equal sign is always valid JSON, which means you can't do npm pkg set foo equal bar, right? It has to be foo equal double quote bar close double quote. And that is a nightmare to type on a CLI. Like if I have to,
good point.
if I have to write JSON, I'm just going to edit the file. Like
Could we take --JSON on the command line to like toggle between whether the value is
no, because
no?
--JSON is output strictly. So I think what we should do is just say, if you want to replace the object with a new object that includes just this one key, you know what? It's 2 commands. You delete it and then you set tap.timeout equals 60.
Yeah, I think it would be better to at least start with the minimal implementation. And I think that will probably provide like 99% of what we want. Just being able to set and remove a key.
And add, right? Like add, set, remove.
Yeah, set like would basically add that key if that key is missing, or changing it if it's already there, right? In the example of tap timeout, if it's already there, it's just going to be replacing the value that is there. We can also have a get, so get tap timeout will just retrieve that value, and a remove, so that you can just delete the key and the value completely from the.
What about like
package.
workspaces where it's an array, let's say, and I just want to add to that array?
Right, array is a good question.
Yeah, so these are great. It needs to be in the RFC. I don't think we have to solve it right now, but there needs to be a way to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I already noted that as how to add to an array or how to remove from an array.
Cool. Okay, let's move on. I know that this just got created today, so folks, if you have more comments, feel free to add to the RFC there, which is, I think it is.
Are there any command line tools out there in the wild that let you do stuff like this? Like
JQ?
No, I mean, JQ is just for querying, like stuff that lets you actually modify the JSON object. Like gets are fine. We can use square braces for keys that have dots or spaces. We can, or just escape spaces. We can dot separate it otherwise. Like that's not a hard parsing problem. The tricky thing is making modifications. So if I want to like remove a particular entry from an array, or if I want to add an entry to an array, like I can imagine some ways to do it, but maybe we don't have to invent that.
And there's an npm package called pkg-jq, which finds the closest package JSON and then uses JQ syntax to edit it. And there's like a number of other packages. I'm trying to track down the one that I've used, but can't find it. But like, I think userland is the place to look for that.
Yeah. But yeah, there's also things like, you know, if I set foo equal bar, I expect to get the string bar. If I set foo equal 1, I expect to get the number 1. You know what I mean? Like, we got to be sort of, there is a little bit of guess what the user intended, but we just need to specify very clearly how it works.
Yeah, I've also seen the user land. I was trying to find them right there too, Jordan. There's a couple tools that I've seen as well. I forget what they are. Okay, so let's look for some prior art as well. Roy, I'm not sure if you added a section there for prior art.
Yeah, and I'm just making, I just added the PKG GQ. I think it's an excellent example. So yeah, feel free to bring up some more if you know about them.
Moving on then to the feature config, add in range. This is 33397. Did you want to speak to this a bit?
Let me open it up. And so basically, this was started as what we call a paper cut, a thing I'd like to see. And as the discussion went on, I realized that there's a bigger problem we wish we would solve. And the problem is outdated. It's kind of not that helpful because it doesn't tell me maybe what could be updated versus what can't be updated. And ultimately, that's the thing I need to know. And even when you do NPM outdated, you'll see maybe something is represented 4 times and twice it's red and twice it's yellow because you know, these 2 things could have updated, but because these 2 required a more limited one, it deduped down to the lower one. Things like that are not easy to track down and see. And I know what Isaac suggested is what really we would want is a dry run of NPM update that could show you what can be updated, and that would solve the problem. Then NPM outdated could just be left alone. So that's where this started. I don't know that I have much more than that other than we would like to solve the problem of how do I better see what could be updated? Either this flag, maybe we look at this and everyone says, no, Isaac, you're wrong. Or we say, yeah, let's do it this other way. So that's where the discussion is.
Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's really 2 reasons that anyone would run NPM outdated. One of them is what it seems to be currently designed for and what a dry run of NPM update would do, which is within the currently defined Semver ranges, what stuff do I need to catch up on, right? That's a happy safe command. Like, show me let's just update all the dependencies, yay. But like the other use case is one that it's not very effective for, which is show me all the stuff that I have to go out of my way to upgrade to because it's probably going to break shit. And like, usually what I do is I manually, I update all my dependencies within the range, and then I run a different command, like an NPM package that shows me all of the things that aren't at the latest version, which include major bumps. And then I have to manually go look through those one at a time. And sort of designing around both workflows might be helpful. You know, I think NPM update dry run is a great idea. And I think that it would probably cover that first use case completely in a very intuitive way. But like when people run out NPM outdated, I think they're conflating both of those things in their head, right? So like if I have ESLint 6 and ESLint 7 is out, I don't want to know that the next minor is out. I want to know that 7's out because I'm outdated, right? Like, anyway, yeah.
That's good.
If we printed the diffs on, if we printed the diff when you do a dry run reify, then I think that would probably just be a good first step anyway, right? Like, because right now install with -- dry run is profoundly useless.
So dry run would be like a signal to output.
Yeah. So reify
Well,
output.
To add to that,
It would also probably hopefully show up when we don't do dry run.
Yeah.
So I don't
Sorry.
use NPM update because over the years and NPM versions, it's done different things and often not what I expected. So I actually really like the idea of dry run just for the sake of it would allow me to see what it's about to do and figure out if maybe this is actually a command I can use now because it matches my expectations. So I definitely think it's a great first step, like regardless of what else is done.
It doesn't sound like anyone's hot for this other flag that changes npm outdated. We just really want npm update dry run.
I think that what I was describing about the two mental models, like I think I want to upgrade dangerous things. That's what I would want to flag on outdated for. Like I'd want the default view of outdated to kind of be like, show me in range things I'm missing, and the flag to be like, show me out of range things I'm missing. But I don't know if that's exactly what's being requested.
Even if it's not, that could be what this pull request is now. If you could give it a once over and make sure the language makes sense with what your mental model is, that can solve that problem. Then the dry run of npm update could be a separate one. I would really appreciate that review, Jordan. Then I could go forward to this pull request, knowing better defining the problem we're solving, right? Okay, thank you. That's all the discussion we needed on this.
Cool. And feel free, folks, the PR is right there. If you want to check out what the in-range flag was the purpose of that, I think, as well.
Just great, because like, that's not the original problem I was solving. So
no,
love it.
But it still was filtering that view was something that I know even Wes has talked about many times too. So I still like the PR. And Rebecca, I see you're saying out of range updates implies not reporting on transitive dependencies too. Did you want to speak to that?
I mean, yeah, because well, reporting on out of range updates for transitive dependencies isn't useful because you have no way of actually updating them yourself. So this would be for your direct dependencies, which is, yeah, I think that there are those two modes. There's like my tree, something deep in my tree might be out of date and I'd like to update it. And then there's, I want to actually make a change to my dependencies. And those are different mental models.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. If folks want to, or I guess Jordan specifically, if you want to take a look at that PR, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm typing out a comment now.
Moving on then, we have about 15 minutes left. RFC 392, group outdated packages by dependency type. This was opened a couple weeks back. I forget if we've discussed this yet. Nobody, it looks like nobody has commented yet on this. Seems interesting. Again, it's in the similar vein to improving the outdated output. Actually, go ahead, Wes.
The tooling we have at work, I initially had a similar output where things were mixed, and I got this exact same feedback from like multiple different user groups, totally unrelated. They said, "Hey, could you group by type?" So I feel like that is a bit of user research that says this might be a good user experience improvement.
100%. Yeah.
Sorting by type is pretty straightforward.
Okay, just so we're aware, that's going to break things up because sometimes I have it in both, right? And that's kind of this thing where like ESLint, like I have a dependency in ESLint and I've installed something else in a dev dep that requires it, right? And my package JSON is ESLint _1. And this dev dependency says I need 111, right? Now 111 is in my tree, and currently outdated will show both of those. And I can see in one line why it's being tied to 111. If we sort by type, my dependency of ESLint is going to be up here, my dev dep is going to be down here, and that now is even less intuitive than it is today.
So you're going to have it in twice? Is that what you're saying? Sorry. Yeah, because you have it.
Well, it is
twice.
already twice, but it won't.
Yeah.
You're not grouped by name anymore because it's two different types. So you're, if you do deps up here and dev down here, ESLint's going to be both, and it's going to be even less apparent why. I'm looking at my production dependencies, I'm at 111. I could update to 112. Update isn't working. Why not? It's because this dev dep down here that I've now sorted down is pinning me.
Right.
Which
So
is already a confusing thing in the output of outdated, even more so if we split them up.
we could actually kind of split the difference here pretty nicely. So the way that I might approach this is effectively we sort by the dev type and then by name. But then if something is a name that's already been mentioned, it basically gets mentioned under that name. Like, so we're sort of sorting by the first dev type that a given name was found under, and then by name, if that makes sense.
This is also a scenario that only happens if you explicitly requested a depth greater than 0.
Yeah, or dash all.
And that was already, like, that output is already pretty confusing.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying there, because I never put depth, and I see this on my outdated. That was what sparked this other pull.
Well, the current docs anyway, and my memory of how it worked at one point at any rate was that that it should only be doing top level dependencies.
But now we actually see the whole tree, so we get all of the edges on it. We're only looking at top level depths, but if that thing has other dependents, we're still showing that as
still
part of
printing
its
it out,
required range.
even though it was at a deeper level. Got it.
Right. So we're well, only because that node was a top level dep.
Yeah.
But if something else depended on it, then that dependency will also be shown.
It was one of the ways that depth was always confusing, because it had to do with the physical layout of the tree, not the, All right, got it.
So yeah, now it's showing everything that is a dependency of the root project, but it's showing all the dependents of those things that are dependencies of the root project.
Yeah, I like your suggestion, Isaac. We just have to make sure that we're being consistent with what order of priority we give things. Like production comes first, dev comes second. We've kind of started that in Arborist with one of the last refactors, trying to consistently go through them in layout order. This would need to make sure it follows that. But other than that, I think that's perfectly acceptable. How that outputs, I don't know.
So just to be mindful of time, we have about 13 minutes left and about 4 or 5 topics left. So maybe if we can get some feedback actually on this RFC, that'd be great. And it still sounds like useful, very useful, and in line with what we just did with the in-range flag. So would love more filtering of outdated update. So yeah, cool. If we can, let's move on to, and thanks for adding notes there, Isaac. To the, where are we at? Number 7, our RFC 390. So this is the npm publish should fail when files are misconfigured in package JSON or they don't exist. And I believe we had a good conversation about this with the, was this the globbing discussion last week?
Yeah. I don't know if I'd call it a good discussion. It was definitely a discussion.
Contentious discussion about what's included versus what's not.
Well, like, it's a deceptively, it's a simple thing to ask for and a deceptively complicated thing to deliver. Because those things are globs, because they can have, negated globs included in them. And like we could do something like this and say, yeah, we're going to not, if a glob doesn't match anything, then we could print a warning or something. There is some facility for doing that. It's just getting it right and having it not be confusing to users is a little bit more daunting than it might seem. In the simple case where you're including just a folder or a file, yeah, we can certainly do that relatively easily, but
okay, so I don't know if we had any action items from last week then. Nobody commented on this in the last week or two, so I'm just wondering if there's do we want just essentially close out the discussion and say like either, like we don't know how we would move forward with this because it's technically too complicated to like discern what the intention was. Like, go ahead, Jordan. I see you keep.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, from what we talked about last week, I mean, I continue to believe that with a glob, you can't know the intention about whether they expect a file to be there or not. But the semantics it almost always has is nothing is fine. But without a glob, even if it's just brace expansion, the semantics is that you're pointing explicitly to a thing. And so I think it would be really useful to warn and eventually error on those. Whether we, you could maybe warn on the glob, but I feel like that would be just particularly noisy.
Well, I think so. Glob is more than just star, right? Glob is, and there is a way to know if a glob matched anything or not. It's like either we get an empty array or we get an array that has some things in it.
I mean, a brace expansion isn't a glob.
Well, when dealing with ignore files, it is. It's treated as just another. It is a glob because it's not shell globs. It's ignore file globs. They're slightly different semantics.
Okay.
So what we would just need to be clear on is if you do, open brace A comma B in your files list, and we have A and we don't have B, that's a pass. That works. There's no warning there. If you have files A and another files entry B, even if A and B are globs, they both have to match something. So, the other kind of potential area for just being very clear is, does it have to match something new? Because right now, what we do when we create the package list, the pack list of files, we're just sort of like squashing all those arrays together. And so, if you have two entries in files that match, like there's A/star and then there's A or B/star, and the second one only matches things that are in the first one. Do we call that a warning or an error? And I would suggest no, we don't. It's just each glob in files has to match something if it's not a negated glob. And if it is negated, we are never going to error on it because you're saying what you didn't want. And if you didn't find those things, great.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not going to dispute the definitions as it applies to ignore files. You have way more. I haven't looked into it at all, and you have looked into it extensively. But more that
deep rat's nest.
Right. I would be very surprised if we found an existence of a files list in the wild where the author's intention that had braces like A comma B, and where the author's intention was not, I always want both of those two files. I would be very surprised to learn that somebody didn't expect shell semantics there.
Well, but why? Why wouldn't you just have two entries? Files is already an array.
Because it's shorter and people like shorter stuff.
Okay, well then they get what they get and they don't get upset.
Well, I get that that's how it plays out. I'm just saying that that because that's how it works on the shell, and that's where most people are likely to use that syntax. My suspicion is that their expectation will be informed by that, and thus, now that we can still, it's still fine to say we're not going to do it because that's the way get ignore semantics works. Sorry, but I would still expect that the thing that is most useful for users would be erroring eventually on missing braced targeted files and ignoring missing star targeted files.
So isn't the safest thing to be warning right now when we believe that you're missing something, and it's not that there's an expectation that and not if we've missed something?
Yeah, we'd start with a warning anyway, right? We'd evolve towards an error on anything, but I think the big question is when we believe it's missing versus when we believe it's just not there, and that's okay. That's what I think what we're discussing now. And what I'm hearing Isaac say is that the get ignore semantics are such that everything that isn't a literal entry is possible. It's okay to be missing.
No,
And that's certainly a place
I'm saying
no,
any
go ahead.
pattern, any individual pattern in the list of files,
Okay.
that entry in files would have to match one or more things.
Okay.
You know, so then the other place where this might get a little tricky is, let's say I have files and I put in my files list lib, source, docs. And there's a folder named source, but there's nothing in it. So we match the folder and we continue our exploration. We say, okay, this is a place I'm supposed to go look for more files. And then I don't find any. If that has to be a warning, that's going to be really tricky.
Okay.
Right? Like if the folder's there, but there's nothing in it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
After 2 weeks of discussion here, I'm wondering if this is the right choice. We are trying, as an org here, to bend away from guessing user intent. And to bake guessed user intent into something this core, I think is a mistake. This is a problem solvable with hooks, or not hooks, scripts, like a pre-publish. If you want to pull out your NPM, do a JSON of NPM pack or something and compare it to your glob and see if, something didn't match. Is this a problem we could solve in a way that people could do if they wanted, but we don't bake into NPM publish? Because this feels, I don't know, after 2 days, I'm like, let's not, we're guessing user intent. And that's when I raise my hand and be like, let's stop.
Yeah. So, and that's also why I'm saying, like, we have to be able to summarize exactly what gets warned on in a very precise way, very clearly, right? Like if, and just say, look, if you have files lib and that lib folder is there, we're not going to warn because you specified a thing that exists. If the folder's empty and it doesn't actually include any files, like, okay, well, don't, do like lib/star.js if that's what you cared about, But yeah, it does. When we get into things like treating brace expansion or empty folders as something other than like, was there a match or not, then that's very much, guessing user intent problem and it's just technically very tricky.
Okay. We only have a few minutes left, and I did want to get to a couple updates and just also get to the last few, at least noted agenda items here. If folks can, please add some of this context back to the RFC. Like ZB is the only person who's actually commented on this, and it was 2.5 weeks ago. So if we can pull out some of the insights that you have, Isaac, and give some feedback, that'd be great. Just so that we have it documented, not just in these meeting notes, but also in the thread itself. So quickly moving on, Roy, did you want to speak to the workspaces auto switching RFC? I'm not sure if we had action items on this.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything to comment on these two items that have my name attached here. Basically, this one, I know the next action item is just to clean up the RFC and note the NPMRC option we discussed last time, and just continue the conversation, but steering towards that direction later on. But I think we discussed it past meeting. We can probably move on to the next item.
So I'm just putting no updates for now. And Gar, I think the next one is yours. It's 319 multiple disk tags proposal.
Yeah, I don't remember where we landed on this one. I think because we can't make it an atomic operation, I don't know if we were going to support it. I apologize. This one was not on my radar this week.
I'll just say there's no update for now. And I think the last one is Tierney. Did you want to give a quick update on this RFC?
Yep. Quick update. Got a PR open that is implementing basically just JSON output of licensee. To Jordan's question in that PR, it currently only implements the addition of, you know, running licensee with a flag. Is planned that we will, or that we will update it to run license checking on by default, if and return nothing if there's no license configuration. Like, it won't do anything if there's none. Yeah, and have kind of flags and basically have good DX around it. Would love to get ideas and thoughts in there and review if people have it, but it's very much not done yet. So we'll be continuing to work on that.
Awesome.
The only open comment I have in there is just around the concept that for any default behavior, there also needs to be an explicit config flag to select it, so that if I have a global config that changes the default, I can get back to the default.
Yeah.
Per command.
So planning on having all and potentially none, although none kind of duplicates other functionality that already exists. So
I put the link to the PR just in the notes, and also here in chat if folks want to go check that out. It's a draft right now, so it's still being worked on, and appreciate Roy, I think, paired with you on that, Tierney. So great to get that started. I know we're about a minute over, so I appreciate everybody jumping on the call today. Feel free to continue the conversation, and also continue to open up RFCs and give your feedback in the RFCs repo, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Cheers.